Dear church, let's talk about recovering from the pandemic. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. I'm excited about our guest today. Bobby Ross is joining us. Bobby, who is all things Christian Chronicle. Thank you so much for being with us. Bobby, tell us a little bit about yourself, how things are going in your world, and let's plug the Christian Chronicle while we're at it.
Oh, that sounds good. Well, things are going well in my world. Here, Christian Chronicle, we're based out of Oklahoma Christian University. Somehow I have been here 17 years now.
Wow.
And had 15 years in secular journalism before that. So I think maybe I'm getting old somewhere along the way, but still having a great time reporting the news and kind of trying to see what's happening in churches of Christ. We have a monthly publication I'll hold up here. Latest article is one that one of our correspondents, Cheryl Mann Bacon, wrote about a church that closed in Tennessee in the last month or so, and kind of some of the trends we're seeing there with churches closing and just kind of some of the challenges facing churches of Christ. So yeah, things are good. Appreciate you having me on the podcast.
Well, we always enjoy having you. You've been on once before, and so
right.
And we always enjoy having you. One thing that you said when you were on here last time that I think is important to kind of put out there again is you said, and I love this. You said, we are not a viewspaper. We're a newspaper, and so you get some, maybe some backlash if that may be exaggerated, but maybe some opinions that maybe don't agree with what you've written, but your job is to report the news, and I think that's important for people to know.
Yeah, appreciate you mentioning that. Yeah, we probably do get backlash to some of the things we report, but we try real hard to just report the facts and be as fair as we can. And we do have an editorial page, and we do run some opinion columns from readers, but we try to mark those real clearly. So news is news, and opinions, it's pretty clear to people that, this is an opinion and this is a news story, because probably one of the challenges in just the media industry in general right now is with the internet, it's hard to tell what's news and what's opinion. So we try to be pretty clear, this is news, this is opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have you on today because we're talking about kind of the recovering from the pandemic, and some haven't recovered. Some have or are continuing to recover. When we were prepping for this dialogue, you said, the truth of the matter is it's still kind of open-ended, that we're not done yet. We don't really know how this thing is going to completely play out. But in your research, in looking at, some various churches and studying how they've responded to the pandemic, what things have stuck out to you? What have you noticed?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And knowing I was going to be on this podcast, I kind of sat in my own church yesterday, kind of thinking what's different, what's not from before the pandemic. And, the minister does the intro at the beginning, and then he says, everybody, if you have your phone, there's a QT code on the screen. If you could just, click your phone on that and then type in your name and, your family, who's here, who's coming to the Sunday night for the master dinner tonight. And those are things that in, pre-COVID, we always, there was a little welcome book there on the pew that they passed down. And now it's just like, it's become like old hat for us to just click our phone on there and do that. And then I had my little plastic baggie with my communion, because we're still not passing communion plates. And then they get up and, it's time for the offering, and we're not doing collection plates. We're doing, here's how you can text your contribution. Here's, you can get on the church app. You can, if you do want to write a check, there's a box they tell you where you can go and drop the check. Yeah. So I think at a lot of churches, we're 2+ years into the pandemic, yet a lot of these things that we did when the pandemic hit, we're still doing, because the pandemic is still here. It may, right. Everything I read, it may be here for a while. Our church wore masks for a while. We're not doing that, but that still are some precautions we're taking. I guess, as far as the church landscape itself, I think most churches especially, early in the pandemic, a majority, I don't know if most is the right description, but a majority, kind of found ways, to get people together online, to have services,
Yeah.
Facebook, Zoom, that kind of thing. And I think most churches are back in person now, but there's still a few that are not. Particularly, I know of a African American congregation in the DC area. I know of one in San Francisco where they're still 2+ years later, they're still meeting online and haven't gone back in person.
Wow.
And I think part of that's just, the African American community's been hit harder by COVID in some cases, so they're being more cautious than others.
Yeah.
I'll mention one more thing, and then you can ask a question because I'm starting to ramble. But as far like attendance wise, I've done some informal surveys, in the last month or two in churches, churches that are back meeting together. Most of the attendance numbers they're giving me are down by 1/3 or 1/2
Yeah.
from what they were before the pandemic. But the interesting thing is most of them saying, yeah, but our giving's still about the same. So
Exactly.
It's maybe, the people who haven't returned seem to be the ones that maybe weren't literally invested as much as
Yeah.
some of the others.
Yeah, we've noticed that too. And again, I do kind of like you. When I go someplace, I ask about their attendance, and I'm finding that, about 1/3 and contribution is better than ever, which typically those two things go hand in hand, that if your attendance is down, your contribution is down. And we've always kind of thought that your contribution and your attendance were good barometers as to how happy people were. It was the happiness quotient. It was tied to contribution and to attendance. But this one's an anomaly because your attendance down, but contributions up, which tells me that people are still contributing monetarily and maybe tuning in online, but just don't feel comfortable as of yet getting back. And that's been a frustration as a minister because you want to see faces, and we're I say I know I have been so numbers focused, which is to a detriment. But you just want to see those faces, and there is a portion that you're like, well, you're in person everywhere else in your life. Why are you not back here? So you've got that frustration as well. But it is an interesting dynamic. One thing that I've talked, and this is a personal opinion, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think that it has brought to light some things that were traditional that are okay to do away with. I don't know that it was ever a real good idea to pass communion trays and everybody handle the bread and everybody, sometimes those cups are not filled, but only halfway. So you don't know if somebody drank out of it or not, and in our situation, we went to 2 services and, to add back passing the communion trays is going to add about 10 minutes to the service that we just don't have. And so we've remained with the individual, communion packets. The contribution, kind of the same way. I guess the traditionalists would love to pass the trays because that seems more scriptural to them. But those are some things that I think, at least at our congregation, we may never go back to. And I'm okay with that. And I think there's some other things like that as well. Kind of been that way.
Yeah, I think Sunday night in a lot of places, a lot of churches have just, up until the pandemic, we're still, we're Sunday morning worship, and then you come back and have a Sunday night service. And I know a lot have returned to that, but a lot have decided, have kind of, speaking of tradition, wondered, our attendance was down already on Sunday night because, commuter churches, especially, people are driving a long way to get there.
Sure.
They get home and then they're supposed to turn right back around. So a lot of churches, I think, they stopped the Sunday night in the middle of the pandemic, and in some cases they have kind of quietly decided, maybe that wasn't the best use of our resources or time. And so they've that's been one of those things that, my church has gone from a regular Sunday night service to more of a service oriented kind of thing that they used to do Monday nights, called Monday Night for the Masters, kind of moved to Sunday night, but, and have people do different service projects or singing or that type of thing. While also saying, if you have a family gathering or something that you need to do on Sunday night, feel comfortable doing that. Basically, I guess permission to miss Sunday night if you need to, but kind of that approach. And I heard of there's another church here in the Oklahoma City area where the elders had, Sunday night was just something they were going to go to their graves with.
Uh-huh.
Well, pandemic came along and the elders are kind of like, this is not so bad, not
Yeah.
having to have a shrinking number of people try to keep something together. So they've kind of quietly let that go.
I've noticed that too. And I've noticed that there's been several churches that looked at it as an opportunity to hit the reset button. And coming out of the pandemic, they decided, you know what, we can change some things here that are tradition oriented. So why not? And I have noticed several that, during the pandemic, they met on maybe Sunday morning and that was it. And coming out of the pandemic, they've decided, you know what, we're not going to add back Sunday night, at least not now. Some have added it back, but they've done some things differently, whether it be just a Bible class or a service project type of atmosphere, whatever it is. So that is interesting. And I think personally think a good thing, that we kind of rework our traditions and kind of look at things and evaluate and say, okay, what gives us the best bang for our buck, so to speak, or what is the most edifying and beneficial for our people. Have you seen that in your, talking to people or, doing your research? Have you seen a lot of adapting and adjusting? I know you said a while ago that you've got an article in the most recent issue where Cheryl Mann Bacon is talking about a church that has closed its doors. Is that because of the pandemic? Have you seen a lot of that too?
Yeah, I don't know that this specific church was pandemic related. I think it was, and that's one of the complicating factors in trying to see what's happened with the pandemic, because church attendance among churches of Christ and among Christian groups in general in the U.S. was on a pretty steep decline before the pandemic. And and one thing some observers, experts have questioned is whether it just sped up a lot of things. Like some of the people who haven't returned to church, the question is, were they kind of there on the cliff anyway, and this just kind of pushed them off, and they've kind of, they weren't real into it before, but they were kind of still showing up occasionally, and now they realize Sunday morning I did not go to church, and at least from their perspective, life didn't change too much for them.
Yeah.
So I think we've seen some of that. As far as adapting, I think some have seen an opportunity to kind of, the Chronicle did a panel at the Harding lectureship this past fall on the pandemic issue, and had some people on the panel who were doing some creative things. And I think it was Glenn Newton, who works with a church plant in Florida and also with Herald of Truth. And he kind of, and I hope I'm not quoting him instead of somebody else, but one of the panelists, kind of made kind of the comparison that in a lot of ways, we in the church kind of operate like Sears, Roebuck and Company, and how their stores used to operate, and just thinking that's how people are always going to want to come and do things. And maybe in some ways we're doing a Sears, Roebuck and Company style of church when the world has moved to more of an Amazon kind of world.
Right.
So
that's interesting.
So I think, some have, some are seeing, looking at the online virtual church kind of option and saying, maybe there's a way to be the community, to be Christ to each other online. And maybe we really need to believe that church isn't a building. Maybe church really is the people. So they're trying to, I guess, come up with ways to kind of create community online. And I know a minister in California, and he was telling me, about some of the kind of ways his church is trying to blend in person and virtual.
Uh-huh.
And apparently they have an elder for this church in California who lives in Mississippi.
Huh. That's interesting.
How in the world does an elder in Mississippi shepherd a congregation in California? But then the response is, well, not everybody's in California since the pandemic. We've got members in I think you said New Mexico and some other places across the country. So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
so I think I think there's a lot to learn there because I'm not quite sure how all that works but I mean, that's one thing. There's another member of the panel, Matt Dabbs, had started kind of during the pandemic, started just having a group of people come meet in his backyard, and actually ended up calling it backyard church. And some of the people were like people who would have been a part of a Church of Christ before the pandemic, but others were just neighbors and people he met along the way. And suddenly you have, I think the number was 40 or 50 people just
Wow.
meeting on a Sunday night in a backyard. So in
Yeah.
some ways, there's things like that, back to the basics. Andy and Rosalind Miller are kind of working with college students in Central Florida, and as opposed to that being just getting together at a building on Sunday morning, they're trying to reach Generation X type students who are wanting to be more involved and more connected. So they're doing like small groups through the week, kind of, in some ways it sounds maybe more like an Acts approach to church than the way we do it, where we come and sit in an auditorium
Right.
every Sunday. So I think there's a lot of that with people just trying to see, we've got a fresh start, like you said. How can we really kind of go be Christ?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I know we had a lot of discussions about that during the pandemic, and now we've had them I say post-pandemic. I don't know that we can say that confidently, but we
started a series about a year ago called the Post-Pandemic Church, and then we just really regretted that because the pandemic kept going and going, and that series started to seem really premature.
I bet.
At some point.
Yeah, we keep thinking this is the end. Then the goalpost moves. But we did a drive-by fellowship where we'd drive around and we'd tell people we were coming. They would stand on their porch, and I would sit in my car and wave and talk for a little bit and just try to stay connected. Of course, calling all your members during the pandemic. But one of the discussions that we've had as a staff is, okay, so how do we operate within this changing climate? Do we try to reach those folks online, and maybe even cater's probably not the word, maybe it is, where we try to reach those folks online and try to bring them back slowly instead of just every week saying, hey, why are you still at home? You need to be here, and guilting and shaming them. We've talked about how to make that work with virtual and with in person. We've talked about, is this the new norm, and is this going to have to be something that's permanent in our adapting and adjusting? One of the things that we settled on, the main truth that we settled on, was that there's no substitute for being together. I mean, we firmly believe that we need to be together, and that service and things like that doesn't happen when we're online. And so maybe coaxing people along slowly. And certainly those who are more vulnerable and need to stay home, yes, we're glad that this option is there for you. But we kind of landed on, we need to be together, and church and life happens together. But, there's some ways that we can do that differently too, And so we've looked at that. How can we change and adapt to this when we're together to make our time together the most valuable? And that's been a real challenge. It's been fun in some ways, but it's been a challenge as well. Of course, for me as a minister, I'm just happy we're together. Kind of whatever we're doing, I'm glad that we're together.
Yeah, I think that, and we haven't talked about this, but I think there's also been challenges just with inside individual congregations, just with do we wear masks or not? How long do we not meet in person? I think there's been some political challenges.
Absolutely.
With different politics, different views of issues like race. I just think, and that maybe in some cases compounded by the fact that churches weren't together. So it was real easy to get into like online silos and things that you might have, conflicts that might have been pretty easy to just shake hands or hug at church, but suddenly you're online, and some of these things maybe get a little more tense, and you can speak probably more as a minister than, my understanding is that a lot of ministers have felt really stressed trying to navigate all that. And, that ministers are, I've heard the term exhausted and
Yeah.
just, I saw there was a Barna stat that said 2 out of 5 ministers had seriously thought about leaving ministry in the last year or so. So I think there's things like that are happening on an individual basis that we maybe don't really know.
Yeah.
If a year from now ministers start leaving, maybe it's something that was sparked now and kind of takes time to
Yeah.
develop.
I think so. I think I know of folks personally that have decided this is the time to call it quits. But they were folks that were going to retire anyway at some point soon. And so they decided, the pandemic just sped that up. But it is interesting because, we had those discussions early on. So what kind of restrictions are we going to put in place to keep our people safe? And I remember that initial meeting, we had all these different ideas thrown out that everything from wearing masks, requiring masks, to having hand sanitizer at every entrance, and even releasing people row by row and not letting people just leave on their own. And I remember speaking up and saying, if this is the way it's going to be, why are we even coming together? There's so many restrictions, and it's like we're being policed more than anything else. And I just don't want to operate that way. We never required masks. We strongly encourage them. And I would say early on, 95% of our folks followed that and just did it. But as it waned, you saw less and less of it. We're in West Texas where, the politics is pretty, everybody's pretty well on the same page. But you had some folks, we offered the vaccine. We were a vaccination station at Oldham Lane. We have an elder that is a pharmacist, and he had the vaccine and offered it to anybody in our community, not just our congregation. And we got flack over that. We had threats of anti-vaccine protesters that were going to come and protest outside our church. And it's so sad how divisive. Of course, our whole world's divided right now. So
Right.
all it takes
Right.
is some other thing like this to further increase the divide. But I guess you saw that maybe in some of your reporting, the divide over mask and all those kind of things.
Yeah, we really did, and it's strange when you get like really nasty messages from people who supposedly are brothers and sisters in Christ. Yet,
Absolutely.
yet they're sending you emails that seem like, are you getting most of your information and approach to the world from cable TV news, or are you getting it from the Bible? Because I'm getting a vibe here that most of what you know and feel is more cable TV than what I'm seeing in the Bible.
Sure.
So, we've always gotten some negative reaction to things, but I think, we have gotten, be it COVID or politics or that kind of thing, the last few years, it just seems like even in the church, there's a real divide, and people just, in some cases feel like they can just be really nasty to you if they perceive you on the wrong side of any particular issue.
Yeah, and there's no excuse for that. I mean, I'll say it if nobody else will. I mean, it's never Christ-like to be un-Christ-like, and there's never an excuse for being unchristian. And the way that we acted, some of us over mask or the vaccine or whatever, there's no excuse for, and we should be ashamed of ourselves. But we got a certain amount of pushback from some because we closed our doors for a while. And, we did that, and people said, well, I just don't think we should be closing out of fear. I'm not afraid of this virus. God's going to take care of us and all that kind of stuff. Well, we never closed out of fear. We closed to take care of our people because it was running through our congregation, and people were dying. I got it. And when the preacher gets it, it sets differently. It's just different. And then the man who filled in for me, a fine man who would have been an elder at Oldham Lane, he got it and passed away. And so it it was a different perspective for our congregation when you see people you love passing away from it and it running through our congregation so rampantly that our elders decided, you know what, let's close down for a little while and go to online and let this dust settle, and hopefully we can come back healthier and better than ever. And we did, but it was never out of fear as much as it was, we've got to do something. And that felt like the right thing to do at the moment. But there were a lot of people upset with that. And some of them were people that didn't even go to our congregation. They were just like, they noticed it, right?
Uh-huh. How did you do with the virus?
I did pretty well. I mean, it wasn't fun by any means, but I never had the respiratory issues. I had a cough that lingered, but I was never in danger of being put on a ventilator or anything. But yeah, I mean, it was a struggle for somebody who never gets sick. That was something that my wife got it at the same time. When I tested positive, she had decided, you know what, we're not going to isolate and be distant from each other in our own home. If I'm going to get it, I'm going to get it. And she pretty well showed symptoms right away. She didn't have it nearly as bad. She was just tired. But and then we both ended up getting vaccinated and the booster. So hopefully we're free and clear of it. But yeah, it wasn't fun. And like I said, that's a PR nightmare for a congregation when the minister gets it. It's just different. And I know of congregations where the minister got it and passed away, and that's even more tragic, for a congregation to handle that.
Yeah. Did you get it at church, or is there any way to know?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Kind of where you got it.
I'm not sure. We were in an elders meeting on a Sunday, and I was coughing, and I thought, well, this is strange. I don't usually cough or get sick. And by Monday, I'm on the school board here at Wiley, and I had a school board meeting that night. And one of our school board members was the chief of staff at Hendrick Hospital, and I called him up and I said, "Hey, I'm pretty tired and I'm coughing. What do you think?" He goes, "Do not come to this meeting." And I said, "Okay." So I informed my elders because they were all in the meeting. All the staff and all the elders were in this meeting, and by Tuesday, the elder that was kind of in charge for the month called me and he said, "Chris, you need to go get tested because if you do have it," I wasn't going to get tested because I didn't want to know. I just thought, I'll deal with it. I'm a healthy guy. I'll move on. They said, "You need to go get tested because if you have it, we've all got to isolate it and somebody's going to have to preach on Sunday." And so one of my good friends is my doctor, and I went and he said, "Chris, you're positive." And at that point, I was hoping that I was, because I thought, let's just get this over with. As a minister around all these people, probably going to get it anyway. Let's just get it over with. And so we did the 10-day quarantine thing. And about day 8, I thought, okay, well, I'm good. And by day 9 and 10, I didn't feel good again. So, but I was able to only miss one Sunday. I got back at it, and so it was okay. But yeah, everybody had to isolate. All the elders, all the ministers. It was crazy. So,
wow.
How did you avoid it?
I think so. I mean, I have 3 adult children, and I think they all ended up with it. My daughter-in-law, my middle son's fiance, all got it. But my wife and I, we've always tested negative. And Tammy has autoimmune diseases, so we tried to be extra careful and try to avoid it. And we've got all the shots and boosters. And
yeah,
there was one time when the rest of the family had it that, I had a little bit of a cough and Tammy was, a little bit down. So there's a chance we got it and had a false negative, but I guess never tested positive. So we don't know for sure that we've ever had it.
That's the problem. You never really know for sure, do you?
Yeah, that's true.
So Bobby, as we wrap this up, what have you heard from churches going forward? Have you talked to churches about what the long-term effect is here? Because you mentioned something a while ago that I think is very important, is that I don't know that we're ever going to put this behind us. Maybe the worst days of it, but it looks like this is going to be something we're going to deal with for a very long time. Have you talked to churches about that? Are you seeing churches that are like, I don't know if we're ever going to get back to normal, or what is the new normal? I mean, what are you hearing?
I'm going to look through my notes I had to make sure I hadn't. I think in general, I'm hearing still optimism.
Good.
I think, we mentioned the fact that the fact that the giving has stayed stable kind of
Yes.
probably puts church staffs in a little bit, feeling like, yeah, we're not going to lose our jobs. And I think that a lot of churches do see some opportunity here to just, churches of Christ, we've always been about the basics and getting back to the Bible. And seems like this may be a great time to just,
Yeah.
I've heard, some ministers have said, what, is there something God's trying to tell us going through this experience? And maybe we need to just pray and just kind of listen and see where he's leading us and see maybe, because I'm not a Bible scholar, but it seems like a lot of times in the Bible, the worst times come right before the best times. So
True.
maybe coming out of this pandemic, we're going to see some blessings and growth that we can't imagine
Yeah.
right now. So I think a lot of people, I think, are just, you can either be happy or you can cry about where we are. And I think a lot of them are just kind of, how can we go forward in a positive way and just try to, live out where God is leading us and realize that we were never in charge of growth or the future of the church anyway. So all we can do is be faithful and see where God takes us from this crazy time that we've been in for 2+ years.
Yeah. Great point. Bobby, thank you so much for joining us today. Hey, before we get off of here, tell people how they can access Christian Chronicle. I know you have an online presence now, and that's where I read it, but some still want the paper copies. Tell us how we can keep in touch with you.
Oh, sure. You can keep in touch with us. You can find all the information about us at christianchronicle.org. If you would like to receive the print paper and you don't right now, email me at bobby@christianchronicle.org, and I would be happy to give you a complimentary free subscription just to kind of see what we're all about and that kind of thing. We'd love to. We're constantly trying to add new readers, so that would be, just email me and say, hey, I saw you on Dear Church, and I would love to get the Chronicle in the mail, and just give me your name, your home congregation, and your mailing address, and we can do that pretty simply.
Yes. Thank you so much. I love the paper. We receive it at Oldham Lane. We have for years, and we have copies available for members. It's been a great thing. And I just appreciate the work that you're doing for our viewers and listeners. Know that Bobby is a sincere man who is striving to bring to light the stories that are interesting within the churches of Christ, and also to bring about information to help us to better understand what's going on in the brotherhood. And I think it's great. And I appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. And I want to tell our viewers and listeners also that if you have a question, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a question specifically for Bobby, you can email me and I'll make sure that I forward it on to him. And I'm sure you'd be glad to respond. Sure. And, we'd love to hear from you. Please spread the word about the podcast. We're on the platform, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, iTunes. So we'd love for you to share any kind of comments or questions you might have about the podcast and share it with others. Bobby, thank you again. We'll see you soon.
Thanks. Sounds good.
And thank you all for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.